Welcome to Game of Attention. Several subscribers have asked when we'd be talking about out of home. Today's the day. Out of home is a giant channel for advertising with roughly 85% of adults seeing ads at least some of the time. Plus, 80% of consumers make a purchase after seeing an ad outside their home, and 52% engage after seeing a digital out of home ad. Today, we're looking at storytelling in out of home and how that impacts brand narratives. I'm so excited to welcome Lluc and Marc to the discussion. Lluc, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Lluc Martinez. I've been in the out-of-home industry since I started my career in Hong Kong. I started on supply side, so selling all the inventory at Hong Kong Airport, and then moved to London with Clear Channel. So I've got a bit of a view on both airport and roadside environments. I then went agency side with JC&Co on their internal agency called One World, where I was selling all of their global assets. So I got a view on pretty much everything. And now I've moved over to client side with Pernod Ricard, which has really kind of opened my view on out of home and how it works from the client's point of view, because it's very easy to receive a brief from the supply side and just think, well, I just need to sell that. But it's having a deeper understanding of what the brand's actually trying to achieve with their campaigns. That's so important in out of home.
Marc?
Hi, yeah. So I'm Marc Redl, and I come in from a slightly different angle, I guess, to Lluc. I started my career with various publishers, always in London, working across, back in the day, print into digital, and kind of made my way into the tech side of the ad space with a business called Taboola. I started I was part of the starting team for the UK operations for that business. Obviously, they already had a relatively scaled US business. We worked across various relationships from publishers to performance marketers back in the day when arbitraging was all the rage, and obviously clients and brand side for a number of years. I then kind of made a bit of a switch into kind of a bit of a passion project, I guess, and kind of started working in the FMCG food space. I kind of fast forward a couple of years through very boring, very long hours into the brand side of things, working with the Little Moons, and a real unique product and business, but unique in a number of ways, relevant to consumer experience and how we kind of use the brand to really kind of open doors through the out-of-home space that maybe we wouldn't be able to do with a more household or traditional type product. Yeah, slightly different angle, I guess, to most in the out-of-home space, but what we really focus on is a lot of consumer experience, perception, and understanding of how to break down barriers, a consumer's barrier in relation to a unique proposition or product. And yeah, that's kind of what we do. And Little Moons, if any of the listeners don't know, is a mochi ice cream business and has been around for about 10, 12 years, famous for maybe 2-3 years, which I'm sure we'll touch on.
Thank you both so much for being here. I'm really excited because your experience is so different, but also so extensive in your different areas. Lluc, if I could pass the first question to you, please. What challenges and opportunities do you face when using nostalgia as a storytelling device in out-of-home campaigns? And do you think this makes it resonate differently with your target audience based on the size or history of your brand?
Okay, well, let me look at the challenges and opportunities first. I think nostalgia is it's a very powerful device to use because it's connecting from an emotional standpoint with the viewer. Now it's also quite difficult to do correctly. I think one of the biggest things for any advertiser, really, including us, is a deep understanding of your consumer demographic, your target audience, exactly what it is that's going to resonate with them from an emotional standpoint. So I think that's the first challenge that we face. It's also an opportunity because if you do have that data to back it up, then you can really use that to your advantage. So it's both not a challenge and an opportunity. I think also nostalgia as a challenge as well it's got to sit well with your brand. You can't just attempt to use it. It's got to be used in the correct way. So not only a deep understanding of your target audience, but also I think a deep understanding of your brand identity, and who you are, who you're trying to be, and how you're trying to get that across to the viewers. So yeah, I think those would probably be the key challenges. It's very easy to say that they're key challenges, but they are. Advertisers put a lot of time, effort, and research into making sure that they understand who it is that they're targeting and who it is that they're reaching. I think from an opportunity standpoint, using nostalgia, as a form of type of escapism. I mean, there's a small nuance between the two, because nostalgia is an involuntary sensory reaction, rather than escapism being you're able to remove the viewer from their current environment and place them in another one for some period in the past or a moment. We've all had that situation where we hear a certain song, or we see a certain meal that someone's eating, or a certain smell, and it transports us back to that moment. And that's a form of escapism. So it's using nostalgia in that form to try and place people in a more positive environment in their minds really helps with garnering that connection, that emotional connection with the viewer. So it's not only a way to connect with them, but it's also a way to grab attention. Because obviously in the out-of-home environment, it can be very busy. So you've got to find ways to try and achieve that. So it is an opportunity, so you can use it. I think also using nostalgia's a very broad emotion, and everybody's going to experience it differently. So I think that also needs to be taken into account. But again, that is an opportunity, because if you've got a certain product, like, for example, we're in wine and spirits, we have multiple brands across multiple categories. You've got some like Absolute and Havana, for example, that are more fun and happy. Then you've got the more luxurious side, the prestige side, like Royal Salute, for example. And so it's tapping into what emotions they're going to feel when your brand is being displayed. And from a nostalgic point of view, that can be seen differently across the different brands. So that's also a difficulty when you've got multiple brands within the group, is that you've got to ensure that you're tapping into each one individually at the right time in their campaign. So yeah, I think from my point of view, those would be the challenges and the opportunities, some of them being both. As long as you've got, as I said, the data to back that up and to be able to make informed decisions, then you're on the right track.
Yeah, I think, Luc, you kind of nailed a couple kind of big things there. I think one of the things I think I always think about when I think about nostalgia is how personal it is and how difficult it is to walk that line. Nostalgia, it can remind you of good things and it can remind you of bad things. And ultimately, do you want to tie your brand to something that is potentially super risky and it could be divisive, right? Like, you've got some really great brands that have leveraged that to their advantage, i.e. Marmite. And I'm just going to, for the record, I'm indifferent to Marmite. I can take it or leave it. I'm just going to throw it out there. But I think that, like, your brand absolutely defines your ability to use nostalgia correctly. I also think what's interesting is that since COVID, it feels like nostalgia as part of not just the kind of out-of-home space, but I think as part of almost there's a generational identity with certain types of nostalgia, and they've kind of become like they've been elevated since COVID. It feels quite quickly. So I think of shows like Friends, for example, which for a long time was defined by defined you as probably like an elder millennial, right? But now it's being adopted by a much younger generation, and I think that brands and campaigns can tap into that, but I think it's very difficult. I think it takes a really skilled marketer to be able to do that without alienating. And I agree that I think every challenge in this space definitely has an opportunity side. But I think that when I think about who's doing it really well, I mean, there's probably more examples than I can remember. But I think of brands like Liquid Death as a good example, right? Who kind of tap into nostalgia in a significant in a different way, right? Like they're not necessarily making it front and center of their campaigns, but they're playing on this idea that you can still be your cool former self in a number of ways by having a product that kind of leads with its coolness, but is safe in a number of ways, right? So and I think that they can kind of play around with it without it being super risky. and everything then becomes kind of a bit of an opportunity. But I think the long and the short is that if you leverage nostalgia too heavily, I think that can fall off a cliff quite quickly. I think you've got to be really careful. So yeah, I think it just takes someone really skilled and the right brand to do it well.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. It's a very, very difficult device to use, especially in out of home, because I mean, you got to remember, in out of home, you've got a very short space of time to convey that emotion. So you've got to be on point from the very beginning and know your target audience. So yeah, I think that's well said.
I was just gonna say, was it Bumble who did the thing where they like really turned off a whole audience because they did some out-of-home ads that were a bit risque? Was it Bumble? And like there was this huge backlash of it. Yeah, it just reminded me of like that instant turn-off because they had like this really bad response.
That's
they
very
just went too far.
Yeah, you see brands who they'll do like a one-off, like just like a flicker or a single billboard or whatever it might be, just almost like a bit of like provocation, a bit like to provoke a reaction, and then step back into the safeness of like the wider campaign. I think that's a tactic you see loads. Certainly in food and drink, you see it all the time. Brands like BrewDog who willfully go against advertising rules in order to create a bit of a fuss. Now that's old hat, right? You're like, oh, cool, you're blowing up something, or you're doing something you shouldn't. I think that brands can be accused of being disingenuous quite easily. It's always obvious when it's done badly, and sometimes sneaky when it's done really well.
Same with everything, isn't it? Like you have a generally good day and one bad thing happens, you usually fixate on that bad thing, and it's the same, isn't it? You just that kind of sits and hangs, and it's the same with advertising. You get it wrong, and it will sit. There's certain brands that you kind of develop a relationship with. Like for me, it's Oatly. I love Oatly. I just love how they advertise, and I have a bond with them. It's bizarre, but it's through their advertising. They've kind of made me feel like I'm part of their crew.
So yeah, I mean, I kind of have the same feeling with, and I mean, the Specsavers. Specsavers have been doing out-of-home advertising so well for so long, and it's the most simple view on the methods that they use and the creative elements, but it is just so impactful. I mean, just a white screen with a small Specsavers logo just to make you squint and realize, oh, maybe I do need, just small things like that. It's out of home is such a creative space for. I mean, as you were saying, with Little Moons is trying to create that consumer experience. It's difficult to do that on a small screen right in front of you. It's easier to do that in the real world where you are experiencing something as you're moving about. So that's why, I mean, for me, out of home has always been my favorite medium. I'm maybe a little bit biased, but
it's really interesting, right? You think of like that escapism piece you mentioned, and if you look at British Airways' recent campaign, is a great example, right? You're standing at the train station. You're probably like, a little bit like lethargic or apathetic to whatever it is you're about to do. And you see this campaign, this billboard, which you instantly recognize. So one box, like very much ticked, and then it transports you into holiday mode or into your own little world. Those campaigns, I agree. Just like, you're just going to be like, and Specsavers, I'm sure you saw the recent one where they had their consistency is to be applauded, and they had the Welcome to Melbourne sign in Sydney Airport, right? Just like nailed it. So yeah, very cool.
Right, Mark, can I ask you, speaking about continuity, how do you build continuity in your out-of-home storytelling campaigns over time to ensure that each campaign continues to add to the long-term narrative of your brand?
I think it all boils down to knowing who your customer is. I think if you absolutely know who that person is and what that profile is, I guess you're able to any creative you come up with, any copy content, whatever it is you're thinking of doing, whatever like levers you're thinking of pulling, you're able to kind of look back, and you can have this kind of like this pillar, this steadfastness in this consistency through having a really clearly defined kind of end person in mind, end viewer in mind. I think the brands that don't know that, I think that they get found out, or they kind of those trends fall away. I think it's not just in the content and the creative. I think that obviously is really important for continuity, but I think any business that has a consistency across the different teams and departments, everyone's bought into the various different methods and methodology, and that is conveyed in every way, means, and platform and touch points. So I guess I think about if we take Specsavers as an example, right? And I openly hold my hand up saying, like, these guys, they nail it as far as the out-of-home ad space is concerned. That brilliantness, that brilliance, and that kind of like their creativity, it kind of ends with the stores, right? Your store experience is not the same as the experience you have if you only know them from the out-of-home space. You think these guys are probably like really forward-thinking, really advanced. That's not necessarily the case. Now, there's a practicality to this that obviously needs to be achieved. But I think that ultimately you really got to know who you're trying to target. I think that's really important. And then you need to look at every area, every touch point, because it's not just the ads. To have that long-term narrative really nailed, and Oatly is a great example. You can go to Oatly anywhere they turn up, anywhere they show up, the products, the way they do their POS, the way that their merch looks, the way that the team talks about the products. It's very consistent, and I think that really supports any long-term kind of ambition you have.
Yeah, I mean, that's again, just echoing what you said. I think it's a case of knowing who your target audience is. That's what it boils down to. And I mean, our brands, like I said, we have multiple brands, so it's a bit more complex because it's not necessarily one, it's one product type, but it's very different categories, and each category has its own consumer. Each consumer has its own profile. We break it down into nationalities. I mean, you got to remember, I'm in the travel retail team, so we almost, it's quite unique in the sense of the shopper profile and the consumer itself, because we essentially borrow consumers from the local markets for a short period of time within airports, for example, and we need to tap into that shopper profile in a completely different environment to what they're used to, let's call it downtown or in their daily lives, and trying to have continuity not only in your storytelling, but to keep the continuity with the local market's view on what they want to convey as well. It's very convoluted, it's very complex. So a lot of conversations are meant to be had, and stakeholder alignment, that kind of thing. So I think that goes into aligning your storytelling as well over time, and ensuring that elements are followed. I mean, for us, one of the biggest things is the quality of the liquid itself, and the story behind that, especially when it comes to the whiskies and the malts, because you have a timestamp on these whiskey bottles, whether it be 18 years, 50 years, however many. You've got to convey the quality of that liquid across every single one of your campaigns. Doesn't matter which product it is. You want the brand name to be associated with high quality. So your storytelling's always got to be in line with building a relationship with the production process for each of those brands. So that's, I think, in terms of longevity, there are certain elements that one has to include in their creative development that fall in line with the brand story as well, rather than just that particular product. And then you can filter down into the more detailed versions of what that particular product offers. But I think you have to have a bigger picture view on continuity across the brand, rather than breaking it down into particular products.
What about like shifting audience profiles? Because like at the moment, there's this big movement. It's been going on for a while, the Sober Curious movement. And that's a whole new audience that brands are tapping into. And the same with, I assume, Little Moons, that's become largely popular over the last couple of years. Has that audience shifted, and how do you keep up with the shifting audience needs? And how quickly does it shift?
The problem a lot of a lot of brands have is they try to be relevant to everyone. And the reality is that authenticity, I think, is one of the key underlying things that people value these days. That whether it be, how you're showing up, on a billboard, or whether it be how you kind of talk about your products in a more general sense. I think the reality is inauthentic or people who are trying to play spaces they don't have the authority to play or don't have the license to play, I think tends to backfire. It might work in the short term. I think what we do and what I think tends to work really well is by staying true to the profile that is relevant to your brand, you're ultimately able to take a bit more of I don't want to say a backseat. I want to say more of you're more of a passenger than you are necessarily a leader. Now, sometimes those trends, for example, we went viral on TikTok in kind of multiple countries, and that's something which, we were involved in the platform in a relatively passive way, and that catapulted us into an active role. We had to participate because we were forced to participate. That obviously has worked out well for us, but ultimately, you have to, if you're in a position where you have to participate, or you're able to participate, you absolutely have to, and you should. And at that point, you need to do some quick work as to redefine what that profile is, right? And I think this is really where skilled marketers do well, is they're able to stay true to what they know to be true, but they're also able to concede where flexibility is needed, right? Like, I think you can't just believe, I read Byron Sharp book, this is the only way I'm doing it. Ultimately you do have to adhere to some beliefs and principles, but you do also need to be willing to shift that. But I don't think, unless you have a very, very clear, ticket to play, I think you probably do need to be a bit of a passive observer just until you feel like you're competent enough to engage properly. So yeah, I think I guess it all plays into the risk reward, right? Like, if you get in early, maybe you can capture that audience a bit better or resonate with their profile a bit quicker. But I think for brands, I think that's risky. Challenger brands can do it, but bigger brands and household brands, yeah, they obviously have to tread really carefully. And you're not going to see Coleman's mustard jumping into the TikTok fray. Although if they did, I love Coleman's, right? So maybe they will. Who knows?
I think it's also, I like the idea of this being a passenger that you mentioned. Sometimes it's so important, and I can't think of examples now, but I know that I've experienced examples before of brands who are passengers and go viral. They have such immediate success with a certain campaign or a certain product, whatever it may be, and then they try to get involved. They try to direct where this path is leading, and it almost fails because they're trying to direct it. Sometimes things just need to be left alone. And I think that's something that a lot of marketers forget, that they think, oh, I'm now part of a channel. I've now got to be involved. I need to do this. Sometimes you just got to let it happen. It's got to be organic in a certain sense.
I think there's a lot of it's a generational thing as well, I think, because the younger generations are much quicker to need that instant, it has to happen now. And I wonder if that's something that's going to change over the next generation of marketers that's coming up, how differently they're going to approach things.
I mean, that's also something that I was thinking when you were speaking there, Mark, was also, there's an involuntary shift that you need to make sometimes, but there's also voluntary ones. There's brands need to start tapping into, for example, age demographics. In our history, or at least in the brand's histories, a lot of our brands' biggest demographic was, above 40, above 50, because that's just what whiskey has been identified with as a product. Whereas now we're attempting to tap into those younger professionals, younger high net worth individuals who are becoming very, very prominent in a lot of the big markets, that it would be irresponsible not to try and tap into those. So for us, it's also a shift a voluntary shift, and that's also a very, very precarious and dangerous bridge to be crossing, because, as you were saying, Mark, you have to stay true to who your brand is, and it can't be done quickly. That's never going to be a short-term to medium-term project. That's 10, 15 years in the making that you've got to think about. And then you've got to take other things into account, like what's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years, what trends are going to happen. So I think keeping true to those pillars that you have will set you up for a better chance of success, because you don't have to change, you don't have to modify things too much in the long run. So
I think what's really interesting, right, is that if you take like virality of like a brand or a video, that's often for people the very first instance of them interacting or seeing that brand, right? That's part of its appeal, is that you tap into this whole new group of consumers. But for that brand, or for that piece of content, it's not the first foray, right? Like you've most likely been seeding content, been creating content, been doing you've been walking down that path for a long time. I mean, Little Moons is a great example where people, we say we're the slowest burning overnight success, because we'd been around for 10 years before that actually happened, right? And people are like, oh my God, it's like, did it just start? It's like, and that's the way people view virality. I mean, for bigger, longer standing brands, that is a little bit different. People don't think, oh, you've just popped out of nowhere. But ultimately, it's never the first instance. You need to your point, participate voluntarily to be able to refine your strategy, your ability to really do a good job. The days of putting out a random piece of content and it goes viral they're long over, right? So yeah, it's a super interesting space.
I know we've spoken a little bit about kind of evoking emotions, but what are the advantages and limitations of out of home when it comes to evoking emotions compared to other forms of advertising specifically? Luc?
Out of home, for me, it's, I mean, as you said, we spend, what was the figure you used? 85% of our time out of home? Yeah, I mean, for one thing, that's the first advantage. You're able to tap into your target audience for a much longer period of time and at different touch points. So they're going to be experiencing different emotions throughout the day. Using escapism in situations where they're commuting, for example, is very, very powerful. We do that in airports a lot. So people, business travel is a good one, because we know that people do it frequently, and that's actually a nice segue into frequency. So, I mean, in out of home, depending on the out of home buy that you actually you use, a lot of things are sold in networks. So you can target people across the country in multiple environments throughout the day. So they could be, roadside bus stops, or they could be, standalone screens in pedestrian retail areas. They could be standalone screens in shopping malls. But you can have that continuity throughout the day and tap into them, reach them frequently at different points. So that's also definitely a big advantage of out of home. I think not being able to swipe, so not being able to just cancel out your screen, turn it off, and move on to the next ad, whatever it may be. That's also a very big thing, because you're on and they can't take you off. It's a great way of evoking emotions, because it's going to be there and there's nothing you can do about it.
Like, I immediately was transported to like tube rides where you're literally staring at the same ad for 20 minutes, and you're like, not being able to like swipe or turn it off, you get used to that, right? You're like, oh, I can just like move on from this. But I must have stared at like Lebara mobile ads for like 20 minutes every day for far too long, right? So it definitely an advantage, but also a limitation, right? Like not being able to engage with the content because it's fixed. That does limit you, but if you get it right, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, in terms of limitations, the biggest one, and I mean this, what is this series called? It's the game of attention. It is the attention span. It's not always the case that you're going to have someone sitting in front of a screen or a poster ad for 20 minutes on the tube. So I mean, the last time that I checked, the average attention span in out of home was 2 seconds. So you've got to engage in 2 seconds, and you've got to lock them in. And that doesn't always work because some people are walking past posters, so they don't always have more than 2 seconds to view the ad. So I think you've got to be very careful about your creative and the creative development. You've got to be very specific about what you're trying to achieve. Don't try to achieve everything. I think that's the first thing you've got to think about.
Not trying to achieve too much is I can't help but think of that. Those examples we've given, British Airways, Specsavers. The copy is so simple, right? So simple. But you think about it, maybe you see it for a couple of seconds, but you think about it afterwards. You've transported yourself into that creative. So yeah, hard to do, but really effective, I think, when you get it right.
I think, yeah, and also in out of home, I mean, nostalgia is so powerful because you want to be able to transport your consumer into a different world. It's and because you're static, that's kind of one of the most important things to use would be something like nostalgia, where you're, what is nostalgia defined as? It's a longing or a wistful affection for a period in the past. So you want them to have a positive view on your ad and on your brand, what you're trying to convey. You've got to tap into a positive experience in their past. So,
last question for you, Marc, please. Do you see the constraints of out of home, like size, location, or time, as a creative limitation or as an opportunity?
I think you have to view everything as an opportunity. Those things, they're not going to change. Out of home is all about size, location, and time. So you kind of have to engage with that. I think that depending on what you're trying to achieve with the campaign, and again, knowing your shopper profile, your consumer profile, knowing what is authentic and inauthentic to your brand, knowing all of these things that we've talked about, I think size, location, and time can be really effective, and they can be advantages. Obviously, there are obviously constraints, but I don't think that actually is. I don't think that it almost should be taken into account to some degree, right? Like having free reign, i.e. the internet, is hardly like a better platform in every way, shape, or form. There are some advantages to that, but I think that, to Luc's point, you can engage with people in a way that you aren't able to engage with them in a mobile. You don't give them the option to swipe away. You don't, you transport them to a place where everyone's childhood is equal, right? There isn't ads popping up. There isn't the ability to go ad free or have to engage. Ultimately, it creates taking location, a train station, a mundane, grey, open platform, size, big billboard, small bench seats, time. Obviously, in those areas, you're capturing people through their commuting time most of the time. You're able to take that, condense it down, and say, okay, how do we make this person's journey 10 seconds of this platform? How do we make them engage with what we want them to engage with? How do we transport them? How do we use the tools at our disposal? So I think that ultimately it should sharpen your creative wheel, so to speak, or your creative pen, because ultimately you've those things aren't going to change. So I see them as an opportunity more so than as a limitation or as a constraint, which I guess on paper they are.
I think just to add that from a business point of view, from Pernod Ricard Global Travel Retail, I think we haven't seen it as a constraint. I mean, I started about a year and a half ago, something like that, at Pernod, and it's the constraints and the creative limitations of out of home, this size, location, and time, have actually helped us to create new ways of working within the business to be able to utilize those things like size to tie them to our campaign objectives and the metrics that we use internally for campaign effectiveness. And that then filters down into the creative development process as well with our content designers, because we have 5 pillars of effectiveness and what metrics we use. Think of it as a marketing funnel, essentially. Out of home obviously sits in the top of funnel area there with awareness and consideration and so on. So if we can tie certain size formats in out of home to, let's say, the first level of the marketing funnel, it's much easier for us to create almost a creative template to use for any campaigns that will include this brand awareness or product awareness, whatever it may be. It makes it a lot more efficient in all levels of the business to know exactly what you're trying to achieve. And out of home sits in that because it's very easy to break it down into the different aspects. So it's definitely helped us from a business point of view with efficiencies and knowing for the brand teams to know exactly what is going to be displayed in media, especially in out of home.
I realize we're very close to time, but I wanted to ask one more thing if you both have time.
Sure.
So you've mentioned creative there. I wanted to ask, like, you've got your out of home situation, it's static, that's what you've got that space, it's obviously a huge amount of budget. What is your creative testing process before it is up there? I mean,
I'll go first on that. For us, it'll go. So the process is it'll come to me first. Just because I manage all of the out of home media across travel retail, I will have my own input on it, just from years of experience and knowing the placements as well, because we purchase the placements quite often because they're airports. I know what they look like. I've been there before. I know the passenger journey. I know how long they might be looking at it and so on. It's not always easy to convey that to all the stakeholders because not everyone understands. Everyone's got different views on what they want to achieve with the campaign, and product awareness and brand awareness means something different to each different level. But then we also have ad checkers that we use. Our insights team are able to tap into certain platforms that we can put the creatives through. We can also use some of the suppliers like JCDecaux have a very good solution here in the UK where you can send them your creative and it's viewed upon and tested through an out of home system rather than a broader creative system. So those using AI, they tap into data and previous creatives used and eye tracking and so on. So it's a very efficient way of testing creative, which I think is key. Definitely is key.
I'd love to say our process is as rigorous and as vast as Luc's. And look, I think that's probably one of the key differences between the long-standing successful brands and they're much further down their path in refinement of how they of their processes and how they're able to kind of go about delivering the best content. And that's often why you see the big brands deliver the best campaigns. Every now and then, smaller ones come up and make it happen. Oatly is a great example. Everyone thinks Oatly is a small brand, but they're far from it. So our process is very different and actually is led. We have two key people. So obviously, as far as content, creative, and I guess the kind of overarching objectives, that's something I'm heavily involved in alongside our head of brand marketing. And that's mainly because, as a smaller brand, our brand marketing, our trade activations, our experiential marketing, and our out-of-home activities are all very related and pretty closely aligned. Obviously, we have brand guidelines, brand objectives that we look at each piece of content and creative. They have to kind of line up. We have a kind of a relatively settled theme with ice cream from another world. And we kind of just look back at that and say, okay, is this piece of content, is this really aligned with that? And obviously, is it something that we think someone's going to see this and it's going to make them think of beyond, soft serve or beyond scooping and beyond the kind of stuff that we're trying to help consumers. We're trying to break down those barriers to help consumers be a little bit more adventurous when it comes to the ice cream purchase. So the end goal really is this the final question I should run the end goal is this making someone think of what we want them to think of? And I think if the team and myself feel yes, then it's a go.